Now we're going to transition to our next section. It's called Inclusive Spaces. And I'm going to introduce our presenters to you all today. So these lovely folks up here represent Bull City Schools United, all right? This is an organization that these teachers started because they realized that their classrooms needed to be inclusive spaces for all youth in order for students to be gaining this educational experiences that they wanted, right? So I can't have a classroom and not honor the identities of all my students and the multiple identities of all my students and expect for them to learn everything I want them to learn. I have to create a space that will honor that. So these folks are teachers. We have Ms. Cheyenne Solorio. Cheyenne teaches at Bryson Middle School. Some of you went and saw her classroom. She also taught at Neal Middle School. She knows our students really well, right? She teaches English. You have questions about what it's like to teach middle school. She's a phenomenal teacher, so feel free to talk to her. All right, we have Asher. Asher, you're a graduate, like a
I am. I graduated a year ago from Riverside High School.
Awesome. Asher graduated a year ago from Riverside High School, musician, and also does work for Bull City Schools United. Great. All right. We have Jackie Batts, who's right here. Jackie taught at Northern High School and also taught at Neal Middle School. So she's taught our Durham Public School students, teaches English, also a phenomenal educator. And then some of you met Matt last week. Matt Hickson taught at Neal Middle School as well. Taught at Student U, actually. It was his first experience teaching. With Bailey's teacher, just in case you know. All right, so Matt taught at Student U, went on to teach in the schools, and now is working towards becoming an AP. So he graduated with a Master's in Education, or Master's in School Administration, and is foraying into the AP world. All right? All Durham Public School educators, all Durham Public Schools graduates, people that are really familiar with the students that we're going to work with, they're going to kick off our session today. So let's go. That's right. Now let's announce your introduction. So thank y'all for coming. Thank you, Bettina.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. So you're at the beginning of what is a very long and exciting day for you, and I'm really grateful that I get to be in front of you, that we get to be in front of you at the beginning of this day. Particularly, you have an important session this afternoon, and then this morning we're coming for the first time to do this session that we've done with over 1,000 DPS educators, assistant principals, nonprofits, and other folks around the Triangle area. So I'm really excited to give you this presentation, and for me it's exciting because I'm coming home to a place that I've worked 7 different jobs over the course of 5 years, including teaching this lovely person over here. I want to tell you a story actually about one of my first jobs at Student U as a way to kick off what we're doing today. I used to work at the year-round program. Raise your hand if you worked in the year-round program at Student U. Cool. So at the W.G. Pearson Center, y'all weren't there this year, but in the past it's been at the W.G. Pearson Center, and I worked at the year-round program as a family head the first year it kicked off. And at the W.G. Pearson Center, we used to have our free time recess outside every day out back. And there's this big fence that surrounds the yard behind the W.G. Pearson Center. And we would sit in there with all of the Student U students, having fun, bringing joy, doing all of those lovely things that we do here at Student U. And there was these 2 kids who were in the neighborhood that lived nearby, who were not part of Student U, who would always be playing in the street on the other side of the fence. And I got to know them in the course of monitoring my students and also talking to them over the fence. Sometimes we would hoist them over and they would come and play with us, but I got to learn a little bit more about them. One of their names, the older brother's name, was Francisco, and we built a pretty strong bond hanging out there for a whole year. 4 years later, I came to do my internship at Hillside High School. Anyone know Hillside High School? Great. So I was at Hillside High School this past year, and I came to do my administrative internship there. And I show up in the first day in the lobby, and who do I see? Francisco. And to me, it just hit me in that moment, right? Like I've done all this work with Student U, and how important it is to provide an amazing experience for all these kids. But Student U is also now starting to think about the Franciscos, the kids on the other side of the fence, and how do we expand the impact and think deeply about our mission. And that's a little bit about what we're doing here today, but really this whole day is about thinking bigger about the work that we're doing, the leadership that you are building, not only for yourselves in doing this work, but for our students also to become leaders in working in their community and thinking about issues of inequity and difference. Okay? So that's really the frame. I'm going to give you a couple of disclaimers about this training before we get started. Number 1 is I'm going to rely on you all very heavily today to dialogue, to push into yourself, to learn, to think deeply together. Number two, we're going to get you active and moving and engaged in the subject. So please feel free to jump in with us, ask questions, stop us wherever you want, and really engage deeply with the training, because this is ultimately about you all deciding for yourself how you're going to engage with these topics and really getting some learning. I also know that we're at completely different places. Some of us have never taught before. Raise your hand if you've never taught before. All right, give those people a round of applause, please. And if you've taught for years, raise your hand. Or have at least taught for 1 year. Okay, so our veterans in the room. We know that you're in totally different places, so we designed this to allow you all to dialogue with each other and learn from each other and all your different expertise. All right, so you have a handout on your table. I want you to grab it and pass it out. There's two different things. One says, "Good morning, boys and girls." That's not for now. That's an article. The other one has a list of stuff. It has a handout. There's a whole bunch of little boxes on it. Hand that to everyone. Once you have that, go ahead and pull out a pen or pencil or anything you can write with, and just spend 2 minutes quietly reflecting to yourself about a safe space or a welcoming space that you know. This could be a home place, could be a space that you're with your friends, could be anything. It doesn't have to be professional, it doesn't have to be personal, up to you. Just a couple minutes writing for yourself and describing what you see, feel, notice, hear in that really safe place for you. 1 or 2 words that describe what that safe space is to you. I'm asking a couple people to just popcorn share out. Just 1 word. What is 1 word that describes that safe space? So go ahead, whenever you're ready. Asher's actually going to write some of these words up on that little chart paper over there. So if people just want to popcorn, yell out, so Asher can write them up. 1 word to describe a safe space for you.
Cozy.
Someone just said
What was it?
open.
Open?
Accepted.
Vulnerable.
Belonging.
What was that?
Peaceful.
Peaceful?
Love. Known. Known.
Known?
Authentic.
Inclusive.
Appreciated.
Trusting. Accountable.
Awesome. So unless anyone else has any more that they really feel passionate about, and if you do, during a break or something, you can yell up. I just wanted to take a second to reflect on these words and think about them and keep coming back to them throughout the training we're going to spend together, because this is the kind of space we want everyone to feel when they're in our classrooms. We're going to contrast that a little bit right now with a video that was made with students actually talking about their experience of being LGBT students in the classroom, a little bit about what they face. So go ahead and we'll listen to this for a couple minutes, start with this, and then we'll get rolling on some of the other things we're doing.
I knew I was bisexual when I was in middle school, but I didn't really know how to express it. Sometimes you can hear the teachers whispering when you're passing in the hallway talking about it. I had teachers make comments to me before, and I reported it. I said, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, I'm sorry, but sometimes the comments that you say really affect the way I feel, make you feel uncomfortable in your class. It was affecting my learning, like my grades had dropped a little bit, because I didn't want to come to school, I wasn't paying attention. It was just bothering me so much that I had to say something.
My name is Alea. I'm in the 11th grade and I am lesbian. I've gotten used to people saying derogatory words to me. Somebody yelled out the window and called me a dyke and a butch. Certain people still hide the fact that they're a homosexual from their parents. And they look at school as a place of safety for guidance counselors, teachers, and if a homosexual is in class and a teacher says something, they're gonna feel like they still in this show where they can't come out and be who they really are.
I don't understand how you can judge someone just because of their sexuality. That doesn't mean they're an alien.
Words and actions could affect homosexuals, whether they're in the closet or outside of the closet.
Sit in our seat and look and let us show you what you're doing to us. Because I know a lot of teens don't feel comfortable at all.
All right. Turn to the person next to you and just real quick share your quick reaction to hearing those students talk about their experience. Just 60 seconds, your quick reaction to someone next to you. I didn't know. So quickly, a couple things that we're going to go into in this training. I want to give you a little outline of what you're going to see. There are two real main outcomes that we want you to understand. The first is be able to analyze how these things are affecting student achievement and student performance in your classroom. So thinking about how these anti-LGBT messages and an unsafe space impact students in terms of tangible performance and feeling and outcome in your classroom. And the second is really understanding how to get to those strategies that are going to make the space safer for people. So that'll be toward the end. So hold on, and we're going to get through some of this early stuff that gives you a little bit more of that mindset work before we get to giving you a list of strategies or something like that you can take directly back to your classroom. And that's purposeful and intentional because we really want you to sit for a little bit and get into thinking about and analyzing inequity so that when you have experiences or something happens in your classroom that you haven't seen in this presentation or we didn't give you a tool for, you're able to unpack it and think about it through the lens of some of the things that we talked about today. Have folks seen the Courageous Conversations norms before and used them throughout your time here? Or no? Not a student yet, okay. So we're going to use these 4 norms. They speak for themselves, but I'll just quickly recap. As we're having this discussion today, some of these things will be personal and challenging for people. That's good, and that's okay. And this Courageous Conversations norms comes from a book called Courageous Conversations Around Race that are particularly focused on having these conversations in groups like this. And so stay engaged is number 1. When you disengage from a conversation like this, it sends the message to other people around that you're not respecting the content or the idea. So the more engaged you are, the more you're respecting everyone's ability to participate equally. Expect and accept non-closure. We are not going to solve all the problems that go with these issues and all the problems in the world in a 2-hour session or a whole day or really a whole summer. Expecting and accepting that non-closure at the end of this session is important. Number 3 is maybe the most important of these. Experience discomfort with things you're not sure about, maybe that are challenging you for the first time. Those things are all okay and part of a growing process. Sometimes it's good to push back with your own unique experience, and that leads into number 4. Speaking your truth helps others experience that discomfort as well and mesh some of the things that we're feeling and the things that we have in the room today. Okay? Any questions about those norms? Can I get a thumbs up if you feel like you can do those for 2 hours with me? Awesome. That's important. All right, so part 1. Like I said, the first outcome is understanding the impact, analyzing the impact. Part 1 is this right here. Someone with a nice loud reading voice. Go ahead and read the quote.
You can't be neutral on a moving train.
Great. Awesome quote by famous historian Howard Zinn. Really frames this first section, right? We have to take action to create the kind of spaces we just talked about there when there are things that are breaking down the safety for our students. It's not being neutral. There's already things going on in our classroom every day that are impacting our students. We need to know in this first part what those things are and how they function to impact our students. So, first thing, a challenge. Some of you may have seen this before. Some of you are just shh. You're like my co-presenters. I need you to just not give it away. So there's blank white paper on your table, and I'm going to give you a little challenge this morning. So everyone grab one of those pieces of blank white paper and ball it up into a tiny little ball. All right, so once you have your paper ball, I'm going to challenge you to go ahead and shoot it at this, and I'm going to put it right here. The only rules are you have to throw at the same time on the count of 3, and you can't leave your seat. Okay? Throw on the count of 3. You can't. The ever questioning Alex Segbody says, "Define leave my seat." As everyone currently has a butt in a seat, everyone remains with butt and seat. Okay, that works. Wonderful. All right. 3, 2, and 1. All right. If you're pretty certain you made your shot in the middle of all that, stand up. All right. So what we can clearly see is that everyone over here, you are amazing, you are brilliant, you are talented, you are skilled. I can't believe how great you are at this activity. I'm not sure what's going on over here. We just really need to do better. That's pretty unacceptable. All right, grab a seat. So, turn and walk the table. What's wrong with that activity?
So let's get some people to share out. What was wrong with that activity? Yeah?
It wasn't fair to everyone. And it's not really fair to, I guess, make fun of or put down a group because they were unable to do something, especially when the rules weren't fair from the beginning or wasn't fair for everyone. The playing field was nothing for everyone.
Right, and so what you say is really important because it wasn't fair, but also when we think about the praise that we gave people, right, and the things that we attributed to their abilities and their hard work, that also wasn't fair, right? Anybody else?
I heard talking about how even if we were given a second chance to shoot, like we had already missed, and we're still from the same position. So like we probably wouldn't have tried that hard to do it a second time if the situation hadn't changed.
Right. And like we're gonna like dig deep here. What does that box represent? What is that? What is that box for our kids? Life, right? Like standards of success, right? Sometimes that box is opportunity for our kids, right? And so this idea of like we're still in those same positions and our kids having to get there. These safe spaces that we create are important, but it's always important to remember the impact, right? And so thinking about that box and what our role is as teachers. So thinking about the box, what is our role as teachers?
To make the box accessible.
To make the box accessible. So sometimes we have to move the box. Sometimes we have to like, unfortunately, help our kids get carry the kids back to the box, right? Carry them to the box, right? And so we really want you to think about this question right here. Can you create a safe space, everything you have on that list, without thinking about equity? Just take 2-3 minutes, talk to your partners about that, and we'll share out, okay? Anybody want to share out from your conversation? Where's your, oh, no, your hand up. Yeah.
We agree that it's actually counterproductive to try to create a safe space without.
Okay, so they said it was counterproductive to try and create a safe space without reflecting on equity. Can you explain what you meant by that when you say it was counterproductive?
I mean, if you're trying to create a safe space, it would have to be inclusive. And equity is like having that equal play, that equal opportunity or equal resources to get to where you're trying to go. So if you're trying to create a safe space without thinking about equity or even acknowledging it, it's just counterproductive because you're going to leave something out.
And so, thank you so much for that. Also, I heard a little bit more of your conversation. I think within that, as people in the classroom, we have to be aware of that box and where it is, right? We need to be aware, and if we're not, we might think we're creating the safe space, but we're not, right? So we have to be aware of what that box is, how that box was constructed, right? And how sometimes that box isn't fair to our kids as a whole,
right? And we need to be making sure that we are always aware of where our students are in relation to that box. Anybody else want to share out? Yeah?
I was saying, like, just because you make things equal for the students doesn't make it equitable. That's something really important. Yeah, like if you give like one student that is, okay, cool. So like if you give, this is what I was thinking about. Like if you give the tall student the same box as the really short student, like they still have a really long way to go. And I think that like not channeling all of your resources into one student, but making sure that they all have the equal opportunity through that equity.
Yeah. I was just talking to Matt about this yesterday, and this is the thing that we always see, right? Is making sure that we give each kid the necessary tools that they need to succeed. But I don't know if you've seen a third image that's similar to this. And it's like, why is that fence there in the first place, right? And so like, we're working to remove that fence, right? And so yes, we want to make sure that we're giving our kids the necessary tools to be successful, whatever that means to them. But like why would somebody put a fence there, right? Like, it's to keep kids out. It's to keep someone out, right? And to block things.
Or even thinking about the box, like as a whole. Like, why does the box have to exist, right? Like, when we're thinking about who holds the keys to power and success in our classroom, like we are the keeper of the keys in our classroom. And that in and of itself is problematic, right? That like we, as the adult in the room, have the control over where the box is or how to get each other there. So when we're thinking about equity, always being mindful of your own power in your classroom and that dynamic, and to be honest and open with yourself and your kids about that.
Yeah. And when you have that power as an educator, and you know that you're going to have an identity, no matter who you are, you're never going to have exactly the same identity in every facet as all the kids that are sitting in front of you. It is incumbent upon you to know and learn and think deeply about the subject matter and the important things that are important to your students. Sometimes that's as simple as learning from them and things that they care about and do. So that's really the kind of centering of this first activity, is think about, am I doing what I need to do to both dismantle this box, and also, in the absence of being able to do that sometimes, how am I supporting the students over here, not shaming them when they're making shots at something, or they don't feel like they have an equal opportunity because the space doesn't feel comfortable, or their relationship with you is not quite there yet. All that stuff is in progress. Okay? So let's get into looking at a little bit of the way that this manifests itself in traditional classrooms based on some research. And I'm going to give you 4 statistics, and we're going to do a little activity. For the purpose of this activity, we'll go with your left. That's why I'm standing back here. Your left and your right. And I'm going to ask you to stand up and move left if you think that the statement you're about to see is true, and right if you think that it's false. Okay? Left for true, right for false. Here's the first one. Many students who identify as LGBT report missing at least one day of school every month because of that. Left or right? All right, that's overwhelming and kind of sad that we're all so clearly understanding that that is the truth and that that is the case. Yeah, this is true, at least one day per month. So that's at least 9 or 10 days of school year, depending on what your calendar looks like, that students are missing because they're afraid of being bullied that day, just can't do it, feeling like they're not safe in their classroom and they need a mental health day or a break or a day off. So if you're in a traditional high school setting, it's just up to 10 absences that kids are accumulating, 10 days of content material missed that they could be learning and thinking and growing. All right, true. All right, next one. LGBT youth are just as likely to experience homelessness as non-LGBT youth. True, left, right, false. All right. So maybe the wording of this question has some people, we're all over the board, but this is good knowledge for you to know. this is the truth. That's false. They're more likely by a significant amount. 5 to 7% of the population, LGBT population. It's hard to estimate again because depending on students' age, they're not comfortable even self-identifying in an anonymous survey. But we think 5 to 7%. We know about 40% of homeless youth identify as LGBT. That's a huge, huge number. And I'll just tell you, we had a conversation with someone at the LGBTQ Center of Durham who talks with the DPS homeless liaison and someone who works with homeless students in our city specifically. And she said, oh, we think it's about half of the students who are homeless in our county are identified as LGBT. So that's anecdotal, but like we know that this number holds up true probably in Durham as well. Okay. Next. LGBT youth make up 5 to 7% of the population. Gave you a hint there, you know that's true. And 20% of the juvenile justice system. 20% of students who are admitted to the juvenile justice system.
20% is very specific. That's the content, because it thinks you do
All right, so this is true over here. False?
Yes.
Okay. Why do we think false?
I thought it was more from the 20%. I thought it was more.
So this is actually right. It's 20%. Couple notes on this number. First of all, the tie between the first three statistics we heard, I think we can start to think about it, right? Students don't feel safe in school. Sometimes that also includes not feeling safe at home. When they're out with their family, often that results in both school push out and being pushed out of the home in some cases. Homelessness and homeless students in general, right, are not often able to stay in school and sometimes struggle with getting involved in crime or just getting involved in circumstances which end up resulting in them being admitted to the juvenile justice system for various reasons. We all know that there's some situations in our criminal justice system that we need to fix too. So this is true. Again, a huge overrepresentation, and 80% of that 20%, 85% of those students are students of color who identify as LGBT. So there's a huge disparity there as well. All right, last one. Research shows interacting with at least one supportive adult in a school makes students feel significantly safer. True? False? All right. So we think true, significantly safer, one positive adult. This is false. And let me tell you, this research was done by GLSEN, which is a national organization that works with schools on protecting and supporting LGBT students. And what they found was students on average say once they get to know 6 staff members in a building, they start to feel significantly safer. Let's think about this for a second, right? We all know that one teacher we had growing up that we felt great about. We felt like really understood us, supported us, all that sort of stuff. That doesn't necessarily mean we felt great about the school that we were in. And for students to feel comfortable in their school, and in this case, at Student U in general as an entity, they need to interact with a lot of staff members who they believe support and care about them. And this includes aspects of their identity. If you're an LGBT student, this includes I'm an ally for LGBT students and I'm out, and I'll give you some other strategies for how to do that later. But I wanted to really highlight this because it's incumbent upon you, on us, as a Student U community, to hold each other accountable for being allies in lots of different ways, to help understand how the space itself is set up to be safe, and do some digging on that so that our students, as they go from classroom to classroom all day, from their perspective, feel safe all the time, feel like the environment itself is safe. All right? All right, you can go ahead and grab a seat.
So to segue on to this quick talk real quick, Tina introduced us, but I think partly it was that idea that it takes 6 adults in a school building for our kids to feel safe. Because I think Matt and Cheyenne are really good at making sure those 4 walls were a really great place for our kids. And sometimes as teachers, we think that that's all we have control over. But then when you start thinking about impact, remember that's the first part. The kid needs 6 interactions with adults, not 6 interactions, but 6 adults for them to feel safe. We felt like it was our responsibility to expand our work outside of our classroom. So like knowing that and thinking about student you, what's your reaction to statistics? And then like what stuck out to you as far as the student you environment? Just take like 2 minutes, talk to the people next to you, and we'll share out. Okay. Does anybody want to share out? If you were finishing your conversation, if you'd like to just tell us about it as a whole group, that's so good. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we were just saying that like when we were in high school, we only had 4 different teachers. So if you need 6 adults that you feel like support you, like that could be tough. And especially like in a lot of our schools, if you went to our school, you probably didn't know your counselors very well because they had so many students, and so finding those 6 teachers could be really hard.
So like what I'm hearing you say is that even if there are 6 people, that like doesn't mean that kids are actually going to interact with those people in the building, right? Right. Anybody else? Yeah.
Relevant to student you, I was thinking about how students start in 6th grade and go all the way up through the rest of their educational career. So student you has a great opportunity to be an inclusive space that might even have a bigger impact than any middle school or high school because they're with the student youth community for such a long time. It's almost like there's a great opportunity and great responsibility for student youth to be inclusive.
Yeah. Did everybody hear that? Oh, that was amazing. Yes. Yeah.
And like even more immediate, we were thinking about how like it's really important that teachers are on the same page this summer, because if they're feeling safe in one class period but not feeling safe in another class period, it's kind of productive to the work that you're doing.
How many times do we, as like educators, those of us who know, have to kind of like repair and or counsel things that like traumas that our kids have experienced in our buildings, right? So like this idea, oh, this is a safe space, but feeling that I'm sending my students out into hallways that are dangerous for them to navigate, right? So you're right. Anyone else? Thank y'all so much. Oh, sorry, Alex.
I was going to say, Lucy, I'm going to use some of your words, but I think thinking about student youth, this is a growth point for us. We haven't done a great job of doing this, and so I think reflecting, I'm grateful that we're doing it, and I think it's important for all of us to recognize that this is a stretch goal for us, and so to also operate with that reality that we shouldn't assume like we're doing a great job. We have places to grow, which is why we're doing this, and that was important to own and name as part of why we're doing this and our collective expectations moving forward.
Thank you. So wrapping up this like conversation about impact. One, I feel like from this conversation, y'all are in a really great spot, right? Where we like recognize like the things that like we have to work on, but also understanding the opportunity we have here, right, to make a really significant impact on our students. Yes, there's social and emotional health, but also their academic gains. I'm just gonna read this to you. Data consistently shows that all students and LGBT students who agree that they feel safe at school report higher GPAs, are more likely to graduate, are more likely to plan to enroll in college. If we believe all students in Durham should have an opportunity at academic achievement, we must make sure our schools protect them. That last part is us. But this is something that we always emphasize because I think often sometimes people think that safe spaces is something, and then like safe space is something separate from like academic achievement, and it's not, right? You described those safe spaces when we started, and we know that we can't learn and or thrive in a space in which we do not feel safe. So when we have conversations with the district and when we have conversations with teachers in our building, it's important to understand that like those things cannot happen when our kids do not feel safe. And we know that Student U is an amazing environment, but also a very awesome academic place. And so like with that being a college access like organization, these are things that we just always want to make sure that we're keeping in the back of our mind, that is not extra, that is the foundation in which our kids need to achieve those goals, okay?
All right, so we're going to go ahead and move into part 2, identifying microaggressions. Our quote for this section, again, another Howard Zinn quote: "If you join the fight for social justice, you may lose, but just by being part of the struggle, you win, and your life will be better for it." So all of us in this room have chosen to kind of take that step and just continue to be mindful of being a learner as we're going through these different things. I really like talking to educators about microaggressions and microaffirmations, and I overheard a few of your conversations talking about moments of growth, maybe compared from last summer to this summer. And so this section is really hopefully going to give you the tools to identify microaggressions in your space that you are creating and to respond with to those microaggressions with microaffirmations. It's like the easiest fix as an educator to make an inclusive space, but it also tends to be one of the most difficult steps for educators to take. Also, bear with me, I got hit with a case of pneumonia at the end of the school year, so if I'm coughing or anything, I'm not contagious. All right. All right, so this safer space, we keep talking about safe spaces. I mean, realistically, we can't make our classrooms into bubbles where nothing ever happens to our dear ones, our dear students. But when we're thinking about safer spaces, this is where I can fully express my often marginalized identity without fear of judgment or retribution. And when we talk about social anxiety, every student, every human wants to experience success. Even the student who comes into your classroom and it's a turn-up day for them, or they seem to be disengaging, they want to experience success in your classroom. And the issue comes in when they fear that they cannot achieve success in your room, right? If they have a fear of judgment or retribution, or feel like success can't be something that they can get in your room, their motivation goes down and their performance goes down, which we know impacts their academic performance. So if a student comes, or students come into your room, they want to experience success, and they need to feel like you support them in that success. Microaggressions are often subtle, unconscious, and unintentional discrimination. This is not like Confederate flags in your classroom or outright racism or anything like that. These are often unintentional discrimination, little things that people of various marginalized groups experience throughout their lives. There are racial microaggressions, sexual orientation microaggressions, gender identity microaggressions, and the list goes on and on. Yes?
That's Zen?
What?
Is that Howard?
No, that is not Howard Zinn. Does anyone know who that is?
So Palmer.
Yes, Polly Murray. So this is a Durham native.
Hillside High School graduate.
Yes, who was a strong advocate in Durham for these different types of things that we're talking. Check out Polly Murray, incorporate her and all of her amazing work into your classroom. So here are some microaggressions that we see. Again, these are very simple things that you can go into your first day of your classroom to fix. However, I get very, very passionate about this because a lot of the times educators don't see the full impact of just switching your language and switching the way things are done in your classroom. So addressing your class as boys and girls, this is a huge one. It's time for boys to go to the bathroom, it's time for girls to go to the bathroom. You don't have to address them as boys and girls. I frequently address my students as penguins, dear ones. It's a long story. You can use gender-neutral terms because by saying boys and girls, you're implying that there are only two gender identities and that everyone in your classroom has to fall into those two gender identities. And even if you don't have somebody in your classroom that that doesn't identify on the gender binary, that is a message to your classroom where we're not singling people out by gender in this room. Assuming that two students from two different genders are flirting, this is a big one in middle school. Again, you are reinforcing heteronormativity. That is the norm. It also just makes students uncomfortable. We also shouldn't be, as educators, talking about kids flirting. That's just not a thing. All right. When discussing famous scientists, authors, mathematicians, ignoring their LGBTQ identity, and we see this a lot. As an English teacher, it's important to talk about author's purpose and an author's life and why they do the things that they do, why they write the way that they do. But too often, with a lot of those authors, we don't talk about their LGBTQ identity, even though these are instrumental parts of making them who they are as authors. And we talk about straight authors and their families. I mean, we talk about Edgar Allan Poe and his weird relationship with his niece, cousin, whatever that was, and that's okay in the classroom. but it's not okay to talk about some of our authors or our leaders who were gay. So don't shy away from those things. And I know sometimes as educators, we don't want to bring up that subject. I can say from experience that in 6th through 8th grade, talking about an author being gay or talking about something like that is not a big thing. You might have a student go, wait, did you say they like boys? Yes, I did. All right, moving on. All right, again, you're not reinforcing heteronormativity. You're not shying away from it, because the more that we make this like a taboo subject, the more we reinforce heteronormativity and implement microaggressions into our classroom. Asking students who speak another language where they are from, a lot of this stuff has to do with assumptions and checking your assumptions and building relationships with your students and letting them tell you about themselves. Silence in the presence of heterosexist behaviors. It is your job, if you are creating a safer space, to be out as an ally to your kids. And so when your kids see you stay silent in those instances or not address something in a meaningful way, you are then, again, reinforcing those harmful norms in your classroom. Bringing attention to students who act or present outside of typical gender norms as extra or messy. We're gonna get into a few scenarios later on that kind of delve into this more deeply. Sometimes it's uncomfortable if we're not used to it to see somebody maybe presenting or acting outside of what we would typically assume that they should act. However, as the adults in the room, just let your kids be who they are, free from punishment or retribution or judgment from you. This is also a big one, awarding one boy and one girl class student awards. We don't have to separate things by gender. We don't have to keep doing that. It doesn't, I mean, we're going to read an article in a second. It doesn't necessarily make sure that the genders are equal. It's just harmful in presenting these as the gender binary as the norm. So thinking about this is a long list, and I'm sure you can think of others that you might experience on the daily. Go ahead and turn and talk at your table. What are some microaggressions you have seen or heard or experienced in your classroom, in a classroom that you were a part of, at the Starbucks earlier this morning? Yeah?
Could you define heterosexist and heteronormativity real quick?
Yes, so heteronormativity is the assumption that heterosexuality is the norm, that is everyone should be heterosexual, that most people are heterosexual, and anything that is pushing that as the norm. I mean, if I were in a classroom and I was talking to a student of, like as a student, and I was talking to a student of a different gender and my teacher assumed that I was flirting, they would be wrong because I'm not interested in men, right? Or I'm not interested in boys. But that's an assumption and a microaggression that is harmful because it's again showing me that my identity is not the norm, right? And that it is normal for students of two different genders to be flirting in that context.
Also, it's not normal for people of two different genders to be friends, right? And so just thinking about like normativity, just thinking about the impacts of what we implicitly tell our kids is not okay. When we always tell them, like, if we establish the norm, we then also establish what's weird or different, and those things are not acceptable. And so kids can't feel safe like that when there are things that they know, like, that's not okay.
When I don't feel like I'm normal in your classroom, right, I don't feel like I can experience success, and then my social anxiety is going up, my performance is going down, and me as a student, if I were in your class, my behaviors are amping up as well. Because I don't feel like I want to be in your classroom, and I'm going to figure out a way to get out of it. All right. Go ahead and turn and talk at your tables. Microaggressions. No. All right, microaggressions. Yeah?
We were talking about one of the most common ones that we hear all the time, the "that's so gay" thing. We were just talking about how, like, you know, we hear it all the time. Some of us have heard it growing up in middle school and things, but it's like sometimes, especially being in middle school and trying to find our own identity, it's like, how do you address that even as a teacher without seeming, you know, aggressive about it, or without, you know, getting them just kind of shut down, because that's what happens a lot of times. People just shut down. It's like, I don't want to hear what you're saying.
And this is actually like something that frequently comes up. When we get to the microaffirmations part, I'm gonna lead you through like kind of how you handle that situation or our best practices on how to handle that situation. But staying silent in that instance, right, and letting it, oh, middle school kids are just gonna be middle school kids and they're gonna say that, is a microaggression of itself because you're showing your class that that's okay. Thank you for bringing that up. Anybody else?
We were just kind of speaking over here, just about students that don't assign themselves to a certain gender or whatever, they're like gender fluid, I guess would be the term, and how certain students from their own gender that they may have been born to might ostracize them. Like I had an issue with that. Teaching over at Lakewood, I had a gender fluid student who was born male, but didn't want to be associated with any gender, so he got picked on by like other male students, so that was something that I had to kind of correct, just to make sure that his days weren't, bad. And another thing was that we didn't get into, but sports, that's another deterrent, because over at Lakewood, another thing is crazy, the girls love soccer just as much as the boys. So you can't say, hey, you can't play soccer, or why don't you just go over here and hang out with the girls, because they're running up the field, taking up the field just like the guys. So I just found that interesting. That's another thing that we need to be looking forward to, just making sure that associated roles that we would normally associate to one gender, we don't do that. We give everybody equal opportunity or opportunities.
And I'm glad that you bring this up because when we're talking about these discussions, these microaggressions or sexual orientation or gender identity microaggressions specifically are not just harmful to students who identify as LGBT. These are harmful for our students who do fit into those gender norms or identify as a boy, right? If a boy is being super over emotional and we're shutting that down, like don't cry, like chin up, that's harmful to that social and emotional development of that child. And all the other children in the classroom that just saw that interaction go on, right? This is how boys act in this classroom, and so that's the only way that they're allowed to act. And again, these are unintentional and subtle, so it's not like a kid is actively sitting there like, oh, my teacher just used the microaggression, even though when they find out about it, they will call you on it. But you're, again, sending that subliminal message to them. Thank you.
If you have a student that does prefer different pronouns, I've seen a lot where, for example, a student prefers they. I will hear people say, oh, he says this, or he says this, instead of using their pronouns that they.
Yes, and that actually leaves the realm of microaggressions and is just like outright, when you are refusing to use a student's preferred name or pronouns, we have left the unintentional and subtle, and you are not being subtle at all, right? Like, you're just being outright traumatic to that student. Thank you for bringing that up, though. It's kind of a good metaphor to think of microaggressions as mosquito bites. And especially when we think about all of the intersecting identities of our students. So if you are a student of color and you also identify as LGBT, every microaggression that you experience throughout the day is a mosquito bite. And everybody knows that mosquito bites are annoying. One mosquito bite is annoying, is itchy. All right, now being imagined, or a student comes into your classroom and is covered in microaggression mosquito bites, racial microaggressions, sexual identity, or gender identity and sexual orientation microaggressions. If you are absolutely covered in mosquito bites, what are you focused on? Right, how uncomfortable you are. If anyone watches Naked and Afraid, all they talk about is all the bug bites that they've got, like every single episode is the bug bites and it's torture. But that's how the day is for a lot of our students. And we were talking earlier about stuff, it's really difficult to have to unpack that trauma as they come into your room, right? Because we know that if you're focused on getting rid of the itching and the annoyance of the mosquito bites, you cannot be focused on the curriculum and the content that I'm trying to teach you. And so, as you all in the student youth community, working together and supporting each other to address microaggressions with microaffirmations so that your students don't come into your room with as many mosquito bites, right? So that kind of leads us into our conversation of microaffirmations. Oh, just kidding. Got an article. And then we'll talk about microaffirmations, which is like the calamine lotion to microaggressions. So you have an article on your table, Good Morning Boys and Girls. We're going to use the 4A protocol, which is over here. Take your pointer finger in the air, wave it around like you just don't care, point over to that sign. All right, there we go. So I love this protocol, especially when I'm teaching argument. So you're going to go through, use your pen, your pencil, your highlighter, whatever you like to write with, and you are going to write things that you agree with in the article, any assumptions the author makes in the article, anything that you disagree with that you argue, or anything in the article that inspires you to act, or changes your mind about something, something that teaches you something. All right, we're going to give you a couple minutes to go ahead and, yes?
Yeah, there might be some extra copies floating around. We have a few too. If you need one, just raise your hand. We'll make sure one gets to you.
So as I tell my students, go ahead and read that independently, mark it up, and make it ugly with the 4A protocol.
So thanks y'all for digging into that. We were eavesdropping and know you had really awesome conversations. We're not going to debrief that with you since you discussed it so much and for the sake of time.
But does anyone have any questions or anything that needs to be clarified? I love this article because it's very, it's research-based. It has clear-cut examples. It explains it real well for my ADHD self.
So we really want to kind of segue us into talking about the intersectionality between students of color who also identify as LGBTQ. Really quick, that is actually why this issue exists. Talking and doing LGBT work is nothing new. And there have been a lot of, like there's Inside Out, there's a lot of organizations, and there are a lot of people doing this work. And a couple of us were at a round table a couple years ago where they were talking about this work, and someone thought about, well, that sounds awesome, but what about our kids? Because we know that Durham is amazing and has a very diverse population, and a lot of the strategies, or just even the mindset and conversation, was not thinking about the other microaggressions that students with multiple target identities face. So for example, students of color face racism and homophobia in their schools and community. And so it's really important that we think about that, and when we think about that as teachers in Durham and people who work in Durham and student youth. So here's just a couple, these are 3 trends that we're gonna read about, or I'm gonna read to you, and then we're gonna look at some scenarios and see if we can identify them. So 1 in 5 LGBT students report being bullied due to race, ethnicity, or national origin. 2, LGBT youth of color make up 20% of the juvenile justice system and 5% of the general population. LGBTQ youth of color face increased surveillance and policing, harsher school discipline, and consistent blame for their own victimization. And so thinking about the things that students who experience like homophobia or then racism, imagining what it looks like or what it's like to experience both of those things all the time on a daily, right? And I know that we've had conversations, that y'all have had conversations about the school to prison pipeline, and just looking at these things that our students experience, it's really clear how those things connect.
Yeah, I want to point out one thing about this last one. This last piece comes from a report that was done. It's in the resources section of the folder that we're going to send you, and it's also on the last slide of this presentation if you access the slides, or will eventually access the slides on your phone. There's a whole list of resources, and one of them is this 40-something page-long study that really outlines the experience of LGBT youth of color in schools. And in it, it highlights these 3 things as like key themes of the consistent treatment that LGBT youth of color face as students. And so this next slide, we're going to do some scenarios, but I just wanted to point out that that comes from a longer report that has a lot of dense information. If you're ever wanting to sit around and really read that in detail, I highly recommend that you do, because it talks about a lot of these things in great detail. All right.
So we want to start on 1?
Yeah, we can work on 1.
Okay, so let's look at the first one. After months and months of harassment, she blew up and really hurt another student. She ended up getting extended suspension, so, she just dropped out. She was 16 at the time and just didn't see the point of that anymore, and she felt like she wasn't going to be supported in the school. And so thinking about, I know it's on the previous slide, but thinking about the three things that we see that LGBT youth of color, they experience bullying due to their ethnicity and their sexual orientation. They receive increased surveillance and policing. They also experience victimization, blaming for their own victimization. What are some things that you see just in this scenario?
They're also on the bottom of your sheet. You need to change on the bottom of your worksheet, those three things that we just pointed out. So you don't want to look at that and then look at the scenario and see which one of those things you think shows up the most prominently in this scenario.
Alright, so does anybody feel like they're ready to share out which one of those elements they think is most prevalent in this scenario? Yeah, you can raise it. Go ahead.
Harsh discipline and bias.
Yeah, can you explain that for me?
So she was harassed and finally had enough, and so reacted and disciplined. I'm assuming the harassment was ignored months of time. But once she reacted, she got the stage eventually dropped off.
Right, especially when you talk about those harsh disciplines and then also the bias, like application of those things, because her victimization has been going on for months and months and months, right? Also connecting back to Cheyenne and the microaggressions, right? So when we see things like that and we ignore them for months and months and months, and we don't say anything when it's that's so gay, or when kids are called names that are offensive, when we ignore those things, we have a personal part that we play in this, right? When it gets so much, when students understand that the teachers here for me are not ones that are going to be protecting me and or standing up for me, and so then this happens, right? Anybody else? Yes?
This makes me just think of a lot of policies that schools do. It doesn't matter who started it kind of thing, you're still getting consequences for it, whether you're this or not, or whether you got hurt or not, you were in the fight.
Thank you so much for that, just because we work with a lot of young people, and these zero tolerance bullying policies typically they actually hurt the kids they are intended to help, right? Because when you kick a kid out, because when we think about the trauma that our kids experience, sometimes it manifests in this way, especially when our students don't have support and they don't have people to help them cope, or they don't have a place where they feel safe. It manifests sometimes in outbursts and retaliation, and then those are the kids who get kicked out of school, and those are the kids, when you think about those statistics we showed you about the homelessness, when you think about the school to prison pipeline, that's exactly how that happens. Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah.
Yeah, just the fact that it was happening for this long makes me feel like not only was it probably being ignored but by people, but also this student probably didn't have allies in their life that were supporting them and loving them, and that could intervene in the situation before it got to this point. I'm sure if they did, there would have been signs, or they would have been talking about it, and then it didn't have it.
Yeah, and I think that all of those things, none of these instances ever happen the day the kid gets expelled, right? They've been building up, and we all sometimes have even if it's an unintentional role to play in that. What are you gonna say, Cheyenne?
And I think that that's one of the most rewarding things about doing this work with my BCSU family is that I feel like I'm actively taking a role in making educational environments safer for little Cheyenne, right? Who, struggled at home with different things that were against my culture, and coming out as a lesbian and being an out educator. And I see this, and I want to make spaces safer for, little Latina lesbian Cheyenne when she was little. However, one of the most frustrating parts of this work as well is that we don't see, this is not pressure, but this is life or death, right? This is trauma that this child has been experiencing, and I can tell you, and I'm sure you can tell me, countless stories of this happening, where we're blaming a child for their own victimization, or they're being blamed for being their true self, and then we experience this trauma in classrooms, at home, in schools, and this, especially LGBTQ youth of color, are more likely to face exclusionary discipline and to experience the negative ramifications of the school to prison pipeline. And because it's such a small subset of the general population, right, like 5% of our student population, a lot of the times this is seen as an extra or something that isn't that important because it's only a few students, or this testing data is more important, or whatever else is out there. But I can tell you that is one of the most frustrating parts of this work. But I feel very uplifted by you all in this community and your willingness to take on these challenges to make it better for our kids.
Can I say something? I want to say, sad to say, but it goes bigger and beyond than scenario one. Even from the kids that are not even homosexual. This is related to, say, school shooters, kids getting bullied. Basically, it's a snowball effect of them every day not saying anything, or we're not paying attention enough to really the snowballing and getting bigger from school shootings, mass shootings, from them killing themselves, suicide. So that scenario, really sad to say, goes bigger than just suspension.
Yeah, I'll pop in with a quick note of research here. There was a study done on actually in Canada on Canadian high schools, and they looked at high schools that had a GSA, a Gay Straight Alliance, an organization to support their LGBT students, and high schools that did not. And what they found is that actually students in the high schools with GSAs who did not identify as LGBTQ, so straight identified students, all other students, felt safer as well in those schools, as by a statistically significant amount. Because the reality is that when students see that you protect everybody, they know that you're going to protect them. And that's all students, right? So the impact extends, and the research shows that the impact extends to all students of taking care of every group of students that is experiencing identity microaggressions within a building.
And you're also modeling to your community members, your little community members, that they can do that too, right? That they can stand up for each other, that they can protect each other.
All right, scenario 2. So we're gonna pop this one real quick. I'll give a disclaimer. This one is actually a combination of some things that we've seen in students that we know personally within the Durham Public Schools. So this one is actually a little bit closer to home. Obviously, all context has been stripped, but I wanted to just say that because I think it's important for us to note that this sort of stuff happens all of the time here in Durham. So a student who identifies as a trans woman of color also faces challenges in school. She's behind in her course load and finds it difficult to focus. She's usually referred to by a myriad of names, some that they use, some that they don't, by staff members, some of whom don't honor her preferred gender. She often feels the need to perform in order to be validated and ends up subject to more ridicule for this. Staff and administrators monitor her closely and frequently with distrust. So just like a quick 60-second table talk, which one of those 3 things at the bottom of your sheet do you think is showing up most prominently in this scenario? Have 2 people share which of those things you think most prominently showed up in the scenario. What were your commentaries at your table?
You said a combination of all 3. To be perfectly honest, increased surveillance and policing, because the fact that the administration is so focused and keyed on to that individual. I know we were talking about like normative, focus on people, all people. So the fact that they're trans or identified as trans shouldn't be like such a hoopla, I guess would be the word. Harsh school discipline and bias application policies, obviously because of that increased focus. They're probably a little bit more, scrutinized for the fact that they identify as trans, and blamed for their own victimization, obviously, because they chose, that title, but the fact that the administration and others are, increased the focus on it.
Another comment?
We said it was more likely just to be surveillance and policy, because when I read as you were reading the scenario, I was just that Tupac song, All Eyes on Me, that just popped in my head, because it's just she feels that she has to perform so she can validate to everybody else, this is who I am, and you can't make me feel any different. And then the fact that her administrators are closely and frequently watching her, that's gonna make me uncomfortable, that's gonna make me not feel comfortable. I'm not gonna do your work. I've had students who's I don't like the way that teacher makes me feel. I'm not doing it, and you're not going to make me. You know, like, I understand how you feel. You know, you don't like the way they're treating you. You know, but you need to still do the work, and it's hard to have them realize that and feel comfortable with doing it. Because if you're turning in work for somebody you feel doesn't accept you, like them giving you a grade and them telling you how you're doing on your work, it's not going to matter.
Yeah, and for anyone who's ever taught before, you know that when students feel like they're in the spotlight, they are going to perform. Especially when you put students in a negative spotlight, because our human reaction is, you're putting your eyes on me in a negative way, I'm going to try to pivot out of this somehow. And usually the way that young people do that is by trying to get validation from peers, or be funny, or be the jokester, or be whatever it is, to try to deflect away the shame that you're putting on them when you're putting that spotlight on them in that sort of way. So in this case, you know, obviously this student is feeling constantly under the spotlight, constantly not affirmed and watched by administrators.
We also need to remember what happens in our implicit bias when we do put the spotlight on a kid. That kid who might have done the exact same thing as another kid is about to get disciplined, probably like harsher, right? Because this is a kid that like you think like you're gunning for, and like you've always seen them and you've always noticed them. And there have been a lot of experiences where we have other students. Sometimes I'm just gonna name it. They're in my classroom, like not in my school. They've been white students who've done the exact same things, but they haven't gotten the same disciplines and they don't have the same actions because we've already spotlighted and we've already named who is not normal and who is a troublemaker. So remembering not how it makes them feel, but how it makes us act.
I'm going to bounce to Ashley. We had a question earlier that was about heteronormativity and heterosexism. We saved the second half of that for this kind of last piece to really unpack how the gender binary relates to all these other things we're talking about. This is sort of our last big piece of content before we get into a lot of the applications. So I'll pass it over to Ashley.
So y'all did hear a little bit from Cheyenne earlier about heteronormativity and heterosexism, but I feel like a better way to dig into that is actually by using this gender unicorn here, and I'm going to do that by using myself and my identity as an example for you guys, because as I was going through school and digging into what my identity was and how I really perceived and accepted myself, I fell into a lot of standard situations where I didn't fit the standard, I didn't fit the norm. So as giving you my identity up front, I identify as a non-binary transmasculine person, I identify as bisexual, and I identify on the aromantic spectrum. So going through this bit by bit, gender identity. So these are the pieces of who you are on the inside, the pieces that you identify with yourself. So for me, I identify kind of on the lower end of female, woman, and girl, not totally at nothing, but a little bit on this lower side here. I'm higher on the male or masculine side, and somewhere in the middle here on other genders. So I don't totally fit into this role of, exactly male, exactly masculine, but I also don't really fit into a role of being exactly feminine, or really in a solid point in between. It's kind of fluid for me, but it's sort of on different points of this gender identity spectrum. Some people identify fully as female, fully as male. Some people don't identify with any gender at all. Some people's gender identity changes day to day, hour to hour, week to week, just as they feel it. Gender expression is going to be more like how you present yourself to the world. So what do people see when they look at you? So a lot of people fall more in the middle on this, not everyone. I fall pretty low on this feminine side here, higher on the masculine side, and sometimes I fall in between and I don't typically align with totally male or totally female in my presentation. But gender expression does kind of, it's fluid just like identity, and it doesn't always need to align with identity, so that heterosexism comes into play there with gender in that, it's assuming that a person is how they express themselves, and that there's this idea of like, okay, you're man or woman, you're boy or girl, and that the way that you look is going to be in line with that, and that, you're either going to be on this side or you're going to be on that side. Sex assigned at birth is also a little more fluid than we dig into it a little bit, and plays into are assumptions with heterosexism in gender identity and gender expression. So my sex assigned at birth is female, which, of course, as we've talked about, doesn't align with my gender identity or expression. I identify as transgender, so with my female sex assigned at birth, that's going to vary. But I've had a lot of situations where teachers haven't asked. They haven't, hey, what are your pronouns? Or how would you like to be referred? They've just seen, oh, you look female, you must be female, she. So that's the heterosexism playing in there. It also, not everybody's sex assigned at birth is going to be female or male. There are people whose sex assigned at birth is somewhere in between. It's not always going to be just this standard, physical assumption of a female body or physical assumption of a male body. Some people, when they're born, don't fit into that binary understanding. And so those intersex identities exist, and while we don't talk about them much, they still play out in the ways that we interact with our students and the ways that we need to treat them and perceive them outside of that role of female or male. Now, while this is all sort of put in the same discussion, physical and emotional attraction don't necessarily relate to gender identity. Some people have these things tied together and they relate to them on their own. And our heterosexist approach sort of says, oh, I'm perceiving you as this thing, you're expressing yourself as this gender, you must be attracted to the other. And your physical attraction and your emotional attraction must align, and you're looking for this person of an opposite gender to spend your life with. I identify in a kind of less typically seen way. We talk about bisexuality, we talk about heterosexuality, homosexuality. I do identify as bisexual, but I also identify on the aromantic spectrum, which means that my emotional and physical attraction are not necessarily linked. So I identify with my physical attraction sort of equally on all of these spectrums on the higher end. So, I don't just experience attraction towards men in my female-bodied state. I don't just experience attraction towards women in my masculine-identified self. I experience attraction to all sorts of people of all sorts of gender identities. But with my aromantic spectrum identity, I don't always experience emotional attraction in general. So that's a very fluid thing for me. And so when I do experience emotional attraction, it does line up usually with the way that I experience physical attraction. My emotional attraction tends to be less frequent and more fluid. So I don't necessarily feel the same way about a person 3 days apart, or a week apart, or 3 months apart. I very quickly go from, oh, this is like the best thing. I love this person. They're great. They're awesome. I'm super excited to have this person in my life to it's fine. There's nothing weird. This is fine. That's cool. So these are all a spectrum, and the assumption that everybody is going to experience these in the same way plays into this role of heterosexism.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to everyone?
And a lot of the times before colonialism and imperialism and Western expansion, we have civilizations that have been around for thousands and thousands of years that did not have this gender binary of boy and girl, right? The Navajo tribe has 7 different gender expressions and gender identities. And so heterosexism and heteronormativity is this idea that this westernized version of the gender binary and sexual orientation exists like this. And so we, in our classrooms, in our spaces, in our communities, in your families, need to actively combat those things.
Yeah, and all of these things are it is human to be fluid and all over the place on a lot of these things, right? I mean, I think especially gender expression, we police gender expression all the time because it's what comes out and we see. And so we police each other's gender expression even in the way we look at people who are acting a certain way. I'm supposed to be male identified and I'm a little bit too emotional or a little bit too flamboyant, some people would say, right? Those sorts of things, when we're doing policing them, are not only reinforcing these binaries, they're also just contributing to this larger kind of unequal construction of gender, which is also not realistic to human experience, and therefore hurting women and men too in similar ways, and particularly women. We can unpack for a whole nother several days the impact that heterosexism has on women and the unequal nature of women in a lot of workplaces and in society. I have one question. We can move on.
It's more of a comment. Like, I love this unicorn. It's just like I've never seen it this way, and it makes it a lot more understanding, like how there's different ways of expressing yourself, and like the whole spectrum thing. And even like I didn't really look into like the difference between physical and emotional attraction and how different it can be. So it really like paints a picture, like whenever you're trying to understand like your student or someone else.
Yeah, it's a great tool. Also in your toolbox and a lot of other stuff that's in there, you can go in and dig deeper. We have tons of stuff we're not going to get to, obviously.
There's a whole lesson plan.
Whole lesson plans, whole things, yeah. All kinds of resources. All right. So the last piece. We're to the last section of the training. I'm going to just frame it and then pass it over to Cheyenne, who's our resident microaffirmations, microaggressions expert, to talk to you about the other half, which is the microaffirmations we've been talking about, and give you the kind of toolbox. You're going to be on the back side of your sheet, your worksheet now. So we're getting ready to head on home. If you want to just stand up for 10 seconds and like shake it out for this last 20 minutes. This last section is called Empowering Ourselves and Our Students, because a lot of this work is going to be internal work to empower yourself to be an ally and visible and micro-affirming your students in the classroom, even though that is sometimes against the norm. I hope not at CU as much, but in a lot of places sometimes against the norm. We're always working toward this, so empowering our students and ourselves. To start this little section and get us inspired, some words from one of the most inspiring people that we can hear from. Is Maya Angelou always worth the wait?
Yes, always and forever. Understands the power of words more than Maya Angelou. I've been in her home at a party, someone telling a homophobic joke or making fun of someone in a derogatory way, and watched her invite them to leave or stop them in mid-sentence and say, "Not in my house, you won't."
Words are things, I'm convinced. You must be careful about the words you use, or the words you allow to be used in your house. In the Old Testament, we are told in Genesis that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. That's in Genesis. Words are things. You must be careful. Careful about calling people out of their names, using racial pejoratives and sexual pejoratives and all that ignorance. Don't do that. Someday we'll be able to measure the power of words. I think they are things. I think they get on the walls. They get in your wallpaper. They get in your rugs, and your upholstery, and your clothes, and finally into you.
Super powerful stuff. So we're going to allow you all to talk with Cheyenne and discuss and break down microaffirmations, and then we'll close it out with a lecture.
All right, so some calamine lotions for those microaggression mosquito bites. This one's always my favorite one. Addressing your class using gender-neutral terms. I'm an English teacher, so you can kind of align it with your content. Like they're authors, they're scientists, except for I don't really call them. There's a whole long story. I call them penguins or dear ones based on a given basis. But that's a really quick, easy thing that you can do that can also make your environment, and you all organize in families, right? And makes your family a little unique, right? This is what we call ourselves as our family. Safe space signs. One of the most frequent things when we're talking to youth in Durham that they say helps them feel the safest is just having a teacher with one of those safe space signs or an ally sign. I'm an ally to the little rainbow signs. And I'm pretty sure that we can get you all our copy version, so you can put that up with our cool logo. Don't assume any facets of a student's identity. Ask the class for preferred names and pronouns. Now this is do this confidentially at first. So what I do on the very first day of school is I have the kids come in and they usually make like a name tent. And on the inside, they put their preferred pronouns or their preferred name. And then I go around individually when I'm checking roll, also to make sure I'm pronouncing their names correctly, because that is another trauma in and of itself to repeatedly say a student's name wrong. But going through and making sure that I am pronouncing their name correctly, and then giving them that space one-on-one, inviting them to share their preferred pronouns and preferred names. You don't want to turn it into like a policing, like I'm forcing you to share this, because you're just building that relationship. But a lot of students, or some students will really appreciate that, and then you're sending the message to all of your students that you are going to work hard to get to know them individually to make them feel comfortable. Learn and research more about affirming lessons and practices. A lot of best practice strategies as a teacher are going to combat a lot of microaggressions in and of themselves. The best way to combat microaggressions is to have very authentic and engaging lesson plans. The less downtime you give for kids to enter into bullying type behaviors or negative behaviors towards each other, the less you have to address those microaggressions in class. Again, famous scientists, authors, LGBTQ identities, please, please, please don't shy away from that, because you are erasing those identities, and your students are going to connect to them. Yes?
Could you give a sample and a script for how you did that? So say you're talking about Alan Curran, how would you introduce that? I don't know if I know exactly what I would say if I was to do that.
I'm going to switch it to use something that I use, because if we're talking about Audre Lorde, right? So when I'm giving the about me for an author, right? The same like when I'm doing hip hop lit and we're talking about DJ Kool Herc. DJ Kool Herc is from Jamaica, Queens, and all this. And so I would say something like that. Audre Lorde is from this place. She was an out lesbian activist. And then I normally read the bio out loud to the kids as they're following along. And then I keep it moving. I don't shy away from it, and I'm not like bulldozing down the road and not addressing it. So say an out lesbian activist, and if the kids have questions and raise their hand, then we can readdress it then. Does that? Great. And frequently make sure representation matters. Representation is important. So actively seek out these type of people to talk about in your classroom and with your kids. And this can be kind of difficult, especially as a middle school educator trying to relate to kids. Even when you're joking around, if you're making it seem like the only acceptable relationships are heterosexual, that's the flirting thing, or over-policing students that you perceive might be in same-sex couples, or participating in those types of behaviors. A lot of the things that our adolescents are doing are absolutely normal. I had a conversation with an administrator who was very concerned that there were a lot of girls who were ending up in the bathroom in 7th grade who were exploring. But the reality is that all of our kids are exploring. All of our kids are doing this, right? And we have to be mindful of the microaggressions that we are perpetuating when we are only calling out students that we perceive as same-sex or participating in those behaviors. Yes?
Or even talking about it amongst staff. This is one of your scenarios, but to be gossiping about students amongst two teachers, sharing oh, I think this student might be, that can be harmful, because you never know who's going to hear it, and B, you're just promoting, again, the spotlight, right? The spotlight on those students. And you don't know. Those things should be kept confidential and normal, unless, there's no reason, unless a student shares with you that they want you to tell something or have some piece of information so that you can help them feel safer in a situation. There's really no reason to be gossiping about students' sexual orientation or sexual identity or sharing those sort of things without their consent.
Even if you mean to be nice about it,
right.
We don't want to unintentionally out students, or just it's not, oh, you speak Finnish, would you like to get to know, you're getting to know, they're not the representative of their communities, right? So even when we're trying to be nice about it, we don't do that to ourselves.
And we set a safe space as trusting, and part of building that trust, and that's just a policy that I always use, I would never tell another teacher or an adult a student's identity unless that student has come out to me. And again, we're talking, especially when we're talking about LGBTQ youth of color, you are potentially creating a very dangerous environment if you out that student to their parents or their family. So go ahead and think of some more microaffirmations that you could possibly implement into your classroom.
All right. One last time, better than that, student. Yeah. Great.
I'm using that word too much.
So first off, who has the "that's so gay" scenario? Great. Read it out loud, and we'll just start with that one, because that's where we're going in middle school.
A group of students are at lunch. One of them, a male student, starts dancing. Other students around laugh and say, "You're gay."
There's another one also. There are two. That's one, and then the other one is.
Teachers explain to students a new assignment. Students are trying to figure out how to get started. Student says, "This is so gay."
So there's two. There's one where a student is dancing and they are called gay or referred to as gay. There's another one where someone calls an assignment gay. Assignment is not a person, just for those seeking clarification. Most certainly not a person. All right, Cheyenne's going to give us her classroom tips from her 8th grade class, how she handles this discussion.
So a lot of all this starts in the culture that you set up at the beginning. So at the very beginning of the year, I am very explicit about the words that we do not say in our community. And I will say that once through. We do not say gay, we do not say faggot, we do not say any of those types of words. And then we have a little bit of a discussion of like heterosexism and homophobia and why we don't allow those things in our community. The biggest thing, or the biggest tip, is you don't want to shut it all down. If a kid says that, you're not going to be like, "Oh my gosh, we do not say that in here." All right? And you have 7 silent lunches all week for saying that, and are you okay? Are you sure you're okay? Is everyone okay? Because then you are then putting a giant spotlight on what just happened, and you're not having an authentic, meaningful conversation or a teachable moment. You focus on teachable moments. So if a student were to say that in either one of those scenarios, depending on the student, again, this goes back to relationships and building those relationships. There might be some students who I can look at, be like, do we say that in this community? Nah, my bad, Miss Aloria, we don't say this in this community, I'm sorry. Or there might be students where it's not clicking and I can tell of why we don't say that, because that's the important, why we don't say it, not that it's just like a taboo word. And so I'll simply ask that student to step outside. I'm not kicking that student out, right? I'm not like sending them out for saying that word, but I get the student started and then I go outside and have a one-on-one conversation. What did you mean by that? What word did you really mean? What are you feeling? How can we fix this? What was the impact of that statement on our community? How do you think that made others feel? And so having that reflection conversation with that student and not punishing them for misspeaking or saying something that is mostly still widely accepted in society really helps them internalize that process and correct that in the future. I know Miss Jackie, I was going to call you Miss Batts, told me about one situation my second year of teaching, like I felt like I wanted to quit. And she told me about a situation in her classroom, a student that I didn't even teach. Somebody had said, like, "That's so gay." And then, like, the student turned around and be like, remember what Miss Alorio says. Like, we don't need to say that word. And this is a student who I would have never expected that from, who I didn't even know I had an impact on like that. And again, in middle school, like, it's still not, like, he didn't go into the full explanation of why that's not okay to say, that's not what we meant to say, and we need to be specific and concise with our words, but, like, that's a first step, right? Oh, Miss Solo doesn't like that word, right? And it hurts other people. Are there any questions about that? Is that kind of clear? Yeah.
I kind of feel like the conversation that you said at the beginning definitely makes a difference. Is there scripting for that you may have available? Yeah. The second part of that, and I know this might sound kind of stupid, but I just kind of, break it down. But I feel like we all know most of the words that are inflammatory, but is there a list of those words as well?
I have a couple things that can help. I have a community behavior policy that I use in my classroom that specifically lists red light moments and how they should be handled and what students should expect when a red light moment happens, and it lists out like sexism, ableism, racism, and you can like unpack that a little more with the kids. I think we could also send in an email that we send out and moving forward, we can send some recaps of the pointers, and also on the back of your sheet there's some stuff, in the resources there's some stuff, but we'll kind of send you a little email that kind of summarizes some of that stuff. But I think that's good. The big things with this are like, be proactive at the beginning of the year, try to promote private conversation as much as possible, and when it needs to be public, make it a learning moment that's really about the impact on people when we use words. Kind of like I didn't want to stop pulling my Angela video, right? Like that's something I would do in my classroom. I'd be like, hold up, I got this great video, let me show you. And pull it up and show the kids and say, just take a second, you don't have to share out loud, just think for yourself the impact of using some of this language. You can figure it out, you're real smart. Right?
You're modeling like learning in action, right? Like learning isn't just a content or curriculum that you're delivering, you're learning how to, you're teaching your students how to deal with the world, or when there's harm done to the community, using like restorative justice as a framework. Like when one of us is harmed, it harms all of our learning and it impacts us in that way. So I mean, I would do the same thing.
It's important to so I think that when someone says a word that harms our community, that is slightly different than when one of your students is attacked in your classroom. And so we are right, we've had these conversations about like how words impact us, and sometimes we can unpack. Sometimes unpacking is not appropriate when the kid like has just experienced trauma, and I wish that I could give you a script for how to handle that, because I've been teaching 6 years, and this doesn't just happen with students who identify as LGBTQ. This happens when students might be Muslim in your classroom, and something like happens, a very like breach of culture, or like they English might be their second language. This happens a lot, and so one of the things that we found is when we we don't use those kids as teaching moments for the other kids, so we're not going to sacrifice them. And so sometimes what I have to do is like what Cheyenne said, like, okay, I need you to step outside and we'll talk, but then we're going to keep moving just because that kid doesn't need like to be the lesson and the example. And what I always do if I do something like this, and like I teach high school, so they appreciate it, is I'll go back to that kid and I'll say, hey, did I handle that right? Like, do you feel safe? Is there another way in which I should have handled that to make sure that you are safe? And oftentimes it breaks my heart, but they'll be like, yeah, that was cool. Honestly, like I've been through worse. And like you could have handled it way, way more appropriately. And so like I'll apologize, but I think that is really important about the kid who's just experienced trauma in your class. And so just remembering to like, we want to unpack these things, but not with the kid who's just sitting there and they feel like, so now, like I just got called a faggot and now we're about to talk about me more, right? Just remember, so that can't really be scripted, but always making sure that we know the difference between those two situations.
And I feel like there's like three, I know like we're running up on time, but there's like three big takeaways. And I'm trying to, a lot of the times people ask me like how I do this stuff in my classroom. A lot of times I don't know really what to tell them. But the more that you can make your classroom about the we and the community, you're teaching them to self-manage each other. So we do this thing, look up the social contract, capturing kids' hearts. I can send some resources out for that as well. But we do something in my class when someone's feelings are hurt. And that's like a shutdown moment for everything. Like a lot of stuff I'll use as teachable moments, but if somebody throws up this sign, that means that somebody in our community has had their feelings hurt, and so we shut down everything. And then we have that restorative justice type conversation. I pull out a stuffed animal, we have a talking piece. Whose feelings do you believe are hurt? And the kids are really good about doing this, and you have to keep up with it, as in, if some kid, and they'll play around at first, and they'll just throw it, oh, my feelings are hurt because you asked me to do this work. Right? And then we talk about, is that really a serious feelings hurt? Like, did I really hurt your feelings? And if I did, we could talk about it. But once they realize that I'm going to shut down the classroom for every time that symbol goes up, then they start taking it more seriously. And then, again, they're looking out for each other. And I've had students who throw this up when a kid comes in crying from the hallway. Right? And nobody knows what's going on, but her feelings are hurt, and she's in our community. So using those nonverbal signals are helpful to create self-managing classrooms so that the teachable moments are kind of few and far in between because they're teaching themselves. Always ask your students. If you get confused or if you don't feel like you're doing the wrong thing, just like Jackie just modeled or explained, they're going to appreciate that authenticity and that honesty from you so much more. And truth be told, outside of student you, a lot of the kids have never had an adult in a classroom be like, you know, are you cool? Did I handle that okay? Did I mess up? I'm sorry. You know, and then the third one, apologize in public, correct in private. Mm-hmm. It's okay to do something wrong in your class and be like, y'all, I had a bad day yesterday. I didn't have breakfast. I got really frustrated and I did not handle that situation okay. Again, the relationship and the environment that you create in your classroom goes all the way back to that safe space. You feel safe in your classroom. They feel safe in your classroom. They feel respected and heard. So like those 3 big things, if you can work on those, it doesn't necessarily get so much into like, what do you do when this happens? You're really creating that environment where your community takes care of itself.
All right, I'm gonna wrap us because we're over your time. Here's what I'm gonna promise because we didn't get to those scenarios. 2 things. Number 1, I'm gonna send you this email and you can also email me back, email Jackie back, Asher, and I'll put all of our emails. So if you have ever something throughout the summer, you wanna shoot us an email and ask us a question about how we might do something or handle something, please feel free to do that. Second, I know I will be here at least 2 days this summer. So when you see me, if you see me, or any of us, at least 2 days, hopefully more, just grab me out of the hallway, breezeway, and be like, hey, I have a quick question for you about something that we talked about during our training. I'm more than happy to help with anything. And I know if I bring along Miss Bass with me, or Asher with me, or Cheyenne with me, we'll do the same. Okay? You good about that? All right, take a deep breath. Great. This is a lot to digest at once. You're going to struggle with this, fail at it, mess up all the time, and try to improve and seek to improve. There's a couple things I want to leave you with. Number 1 is, this is a constant reflective practice. We don't ever say in a training that we're going to give you all the tools to handle every situation. We try to do the best we can to let you practice some. But the reality is you need to develop for yourself a mindset that allows you to dig into situations, analyze them, and come up with what to do. That's what a teacher does. Little story. I was visiting the Ron Clark Academy in Atlanta. Anyone know Ron Clark? And I was visiting the Ron Clark Academy, and they told us to make a little name tag for ourselves. So I put Matt, he, him, his. And I walked in the building, was walking around, and a 5th grader, because they do a 5th grade, a 5th grader walked up to me while I was at lunch and was like, Mr. Matt, can you tell me about why you put he, him, and his on your name tag? So I was like, wow, thank you so much for asking. You're really, really observant. And I said, I put he, him, and his on my name tag because although I probably look like I identify as a he, as a boy or a man, not everyone in this community might. And there might be people who you think identify as something that actually don't. And when we accidentally assume and say the wrong thing, we make them feel like we're not caring enough about them to get to know who they really are and what they really value. And he was like, and he thought about it for a second. He was like, that's pretty cool. All right, bye. Right, and so the second thing I want to leave you with is, kids are leading this work. Like, kids are thinking about these things, they're curious and inquisitive and positive and open-minded, and when you fail sometimes as an adult to be able to find the way, sometimes it's good to just reconnect with like, okay, I'm working with these children that are curious, inquisitive, positive, and open-minded, and they're going to lead the way on some of these things. Sometimes I just have to listen and help them understand how they can feel safe. You can do that, because that's the power of connecting with young people and being a really good teacher. All right? Got it? Cool. Here's the thank you resources. Again, the slides are going to be sent to you. You'll see all this. There's a whole folder with a ton of stuff. But just from the bottom of my heart and from all of our hearts, we thank you for engaging in this work, and hope you all have an awesome summer and awesome day.